everyone. It's nice to see smiling faces under those masks. It's just nice to see faces and to be seen at the same time. I'll just run through the order in which we'll do things today. I have a couple of things to announce. So beyond that, first we have our program. Following that, we'll have our raffle. I think the items we have, not a whole lot, so we'll just raffle on whatever's there on the table. And then following the raffle, we're going to have a social time. Just people want to stick around and get reacquainted. We haven't seen each other in how long, so we'll do that. And then perhaps stay long enough to share the way at the end of the meeting. Okay. And if anybody has their cell phone, please turn them on. One of the things that I really want to express some concern about is we are coming up on our January meeting, which is our annual election of officers. We are still without a secretary. So if you or anybody you know would like to join our board and be our secretary for at least the 2022 season, that would be wonderful because I don't know if I should use the term legally, but we are under the jurisdiction of the Florida Native Plant Society. We refer to it as the state society. And we are required to have at least 3 elected members on our board. We actually used to have 4, but we decided to create to make the vice president position more of a volunteer position rather than a position. So we do have a president, and we do have a treasurer for next year. We sort of beat the bushes. Cindy and I have been trying to persuade someone to come forward and be a secretary so that it doesn't disrupt our process. So pass the word, or if you're considering that. It's preferable that you're a full-time resident, but at the same time, in this challenging time that we have right now, we could accept somebody who's not a full-time resident. We'll do with that. We also really need a new membership chair and a publicity chair. So those are 2 other items that we could do with them. I'm not going to make any announcements as far as schedules of meetings, field trips, events, and what have you. I'd rather that our membership depends on not only our newsletter, but our website, and a great blog page, our calendar is maintained by Barb, and just about everything that we're doing or planning on doing is on our website. And we also have a Facebook page that you can join, sort of a members only kind of deal. But it does get the word out in terms of what we're doing and when and where. So that's all I have. Does anybody have anything any questions or comments before we get started? Otherwise, Ruth,
Tomorrow night, Dave and I are doing this. It's called a Sunset Stroll. It's a walk. It's going to be at the Garden of the Five Senses in Northport. It's from 4:30 to 5:30, only 1 hour. It's on paved sidewalks. It's going to be very slow, very easy. And this is in case you're looking for something different than getting up at the crack of dawn and being out in the woods for 2 hours at 9 o'clock on any given morning. So this is just a different kind of experience. You're welcome to come. You don't have to register or let us know or anything. But Dave and I will be at the Garden of the Five Senses. It's at $42.99 Pan American in Northport. So if you feel like coming out, come and join us.
I did send it out to the membership. Hopefully we'll get some participants. So, without further ado, Ruth is going to introduce Mr. Miriam and proceed with our program.
Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. I couldn't cut this down, so bear with me. Jack is so busy and has so many different things that he does, and they're all important, so I'm just going to read this whole thing. Our speaker today is Jack Merriam. Jack grew up in Florida, served 3.5 years in the U.S. Navy Submarine Service, and received a BA and an MA from USF in Natural Science. He's currently on the board for the Sarasota Bay Foundation, was a past chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee of the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program, and past board member of the Suncoast Waterkeeper. He is currently a member of the Environment Working Group of the Florida Veterans for Common Sense, which focuses on climate change and other local environmental issues, and has planted a microforest at the celery fields to help reverse climate change. Along with his wife, Carmen, he currently teaches a class on climate change adaptation and mitigation for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Ringling College. His 36 years of water management experience includes Florida legislative staff, 2 state resource agencies, 1 water management district, and 2 local governments. Local government experience was as the environmental manager for Hillsborough and then for Sarasota counties. This involves environmental monitoring, environmental restoration projects, watershed planning, environmental education, and regulatory compliance and rural development. He has been involved with the Tampa Bay National Estuary Program, the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program, and the Charlotte Harbor National Estuary Program. His current professional interests include climate change adaptation and mitigation, living shorelines, and implementation of low-impact development strategies. His personal interests include organic gardening and landscaping, cooking, kayaking, sailing, fishing, and birding on Sarasota Bay, celery fields, and the Mayaca River. Please help me welcome Mr. Jack Merriam.
I'm going to take off my mask, if that's okay, so I can try and project. And Dr. Cody Keller, one of your members, is going to help me by trying to drive my computer. I've lost the driver for my Bluetooth, so we're a little challenged. And if we have problems, if you just bear with us, we'll eventually get there. And so the title was about microforests and how they mitigate climate change and red tide. And both red tide and what happened at Piney Point has been of interest to our veterans group, and as trying to mitigate climate change. Dr. Keller and John Darabek, 2 of our members, wrote a treatise, a 90-page treatise on climate change, and I'll use some things I extracted from that. So I'm going to talk about how trees and native vegetation mitigate both the climate change and our water quality problems. Red tide is just one of the harmful algal blooms that we're suffering in this area in Florida. Am I okay? Okay. And around the world. We're not unique. It's happening more and more around the world. Let's see if we can go to the next one there, Cody. Okay. The main greenhouse gases that we hear about are carbon dioxide is the really big one, and that's the biggest, the yellow part there. It's the biggest of the largest volume of the greenhouse gases. And methane gas gets some publicity. That's what we get from landfills and so on, and from agricultural areas. And lastly, though, that doesn't get much coverage is nitrous oxide. that's nitrogen, and what feeds red tide and all harmful algal blooms is nitrogen. So we are feeding it with the burning of fossil fuels. It's one of the sources of nitrogen. Let's go to the next one there, Kelly. This is a really busy graphic. This was produced by Cindy Heil, Dr. Cindy Heil is now Mote Marine Laboratories Director of the Red Tide Institute. And in 2014, she and 16 world-class scientists published an article about red tide in Harmful Algae periodical. And the only reason I'm showing this is to try and get across to you that the nutrient contributions to red tide are very, very complicated. And there's yellow arrows that are pointing down in each of those, the no bloom, small bloom, larger bloom. That's atmospheric deposition. That's that, among other things, that nitrous oxide that I just mentioned that doesn't get much play is coming out of the atmosphere. And it's ending up in our water bodies. And another interesting thing on there is they referenced an organism called Trichodesmium. And it's an organism that occurs in the Gulf of Mexico. And the interesting thing about that is it is iron deficient. So when it gets more iron, it blooms. And it has the ability to pull nitrogen out of the air and, quote, fix it. So it turns it into organic nitrogen. It dies, and red tide eats it. And where does the iron come from? One of the places it comes from is the Sahara Desert. And sometimes you may hear about the Sahara dust blowing across the Atlantic, and it goes different directions, obviously, depending on the wind direction. But so we are affected by what's happening in Africa fairly directly, depending on what that dust is doing. It may be one of those many things that contributes to red tide blooms. Maybe the African dust. Next. All right, so Cody and I are with the Florida Veterans for Common Sense. And why do we care about all this stuff? Navy Times says that 128 Navy bases are threatened by sea level rise. Climate change is acting as an accelerant for violence and instability, and that's going to affect us all, and certainly the military. So the Department of Defense has declared that climate change is a national security issue, as has Florida Veterans for Common Sense. And a lot of our coastal military bases, and a lot of, certainly again, I was in the Navy. Obviously, the Navy bases are on the coast, and they are now already having problems with inundation. So, again, Department of Defense declared climate change to be a national security issue. And that graphic, Dr. Keller, again, published Urgency in Action, Drawdown to Reverse Climate Change. And one of the, I don't know if you call it a chapter, Cody, but one of the things that I really liked is a section that says the soil will save us. And you guys are the Florida Native Plant Society, and I would suggest to you that it could and should be the Native Soil and Plant Society, because the soil is so important. And that graphic there, Venn diagram, I think they're called, shows soil at the center of water, food, and climate change. All of those things are affected intimately by soil and could be in a positive or a negative way. And as we have more droughts and more floods, soil will be more and more important. And again, back to the Department of Defense talking about violence and whatnot. Part of what happened apparently in Syria and caused mass migration was drought and food shortages. All right, so again, I stole that from Cody's publication there, and it talks about the microorganisms in the soil. And again, we don't tend to think of microorganisms much, but mycorrhizae are fungi that work to help plants get nutrients. And so there's a whole ecosystem in our soils, if we have healthy soils, that actually determine where and if plants, two things, hydrology and soils, typically, where the water is and what the soil looks like determines where plants grow. At the celery fields, we have a lot of clay, unnatural clay, and I'll hopefully remember to come back and talk to that. There's a fascinating book called The Hidden Half of Nature, written by a geomorphologist, I think, David Montgomery, a geologist, and his wife, Ann Bilke, where they focus on how important the soils are. They lived in the Seattle area, and apparently the glaciers had scraped clean all of the topsoil. And so his wife, Ann, basically took a rock yard and built soil on top of it, and ended up with a garden that became a venue for the local garden clubs to come look at because it was so beautiful. So soils are really, really critical. This is out of the Charlotte Harbor 7-county watershed report, which was done in 2011, and you can't read any of that, but the clouds on the left say ET, evapotranspiration, and on the right, rainfall pattern changes. And so trees help to create our weather patterns. They take water from the soil and they pass it through their system, and as you all know better than I, by the way, I forgot to do my caveat here. I taught plant taxonomy a long time ago, and I had to count how long ago it was. It was 48 years, and I've forgotten most all of it. So if I misspeak, you all correct me, please. But and it shows mangroves, another type of tree, and mangroves are really critical in protecting our shorelines. And this area has not done as bad a job as we have in Sarasota County, where 80% of our mangrove or our living shoreline has been hardened. There's now concrete seawalls. And one of the beauties of mangrove shorelines is that as sea level comes up, they just automatically, if not constrained by a seawall behind them, will move landward. So they're going to adjust for climate change automatically. But think about the evapotranspiration. I've got a grand oak in my backyard. I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 of us tried to put our arms around it. And I think 3 of us succeeded in putting our arms around this oak tree. And when I go under that oak tree on the hottest summer day, I feel an updraft, I feel cooler, more humid air. And that's one of the ways that we create weather, is with trees. And what are we doing in Sarasota County? I'm not sure about you guys down here, but we're bulldozing all of those, and we're putting in instead concrete. And that's going to affect our weather patterns. Go ahead. And this is an interesting example of what the importance of trees is. There's a project called the Great Green Wall across Africa. And the Yeah, it doesn't even really show up, pardon me. There's a green line right there, and I think it's 8,000 kilometers that their goal is. They're trying to plant a tree line across the lower part of the Sahara. And this is where we generate hurricanes, in that really dry area. And it's where the humid and the dry air come together. So, once again, not only is the dust affecting us, but that's how we generate a lot of our hurricanes, right there. And they're coming off of Africa. You often hear, if you're listening to the weather, there are systems coming off of Africa, and they're headed for us. So that great green wall is an effort to try and stem the movement of the desert, and to begin to reverse part of that process by getting trees that are going to store water, and their evapotranspiration will help to create different weather patterns. This is the Center for Watershed Protection. It's gotten a number of grants from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and they have this interesting publication on urban trees, and that just says making urban trees count. And the next one is another busy graphic that I just love. My wife says she is assisting me in teaching our class, and that I spend way too much time going into too much detail on science, but I find it fascinating sometimes. Okay, and again, I do have a pointer that I neglected to bring. Among the really interesting things, it says canopy interception and uptake of atmospheric, and in this case it talks about a different form of nitrogen dioxide, which is nitrogen is constantly changing the form. Dr. Kelly Dixon used to be the head chemist at Mote Marine Laboratory, and Kelly was one of the best chemists and water quality chemists I've ever met. And she talked about how hard it is. We were trying to track fertilizer and how it was affecting our bay. And she said, you know, this is nitrate nitrogen. Now that same molecule is organic nitrogen. Now it's something else. And it's really hard to track it. And trees take up, actually, some of that nitrogen pollution through the stomata, the little openings on the bottoms of the leaves. So they're directly taking up some of our air pollution and helping clean the air. They are helping to improve the infiltration rate because they are changing the texture of the soil as the leaves drop. You know, you may have heard the stories about farmers in Brazil looked at the Amazon and said, it is so productive, let's remove all those trees and we'll be able to have just lush farms. And what they failed to realize was the trees were cycling the leaves very rapidly and creating the soil. And when you remove the trees, you no longer had soil. And we've learned that a little bit here in Florida. The Everglades is thousands of years worth of sawgrass carbon stored. And when we drained the Everglades and began farming sugar, and predominantly the peat that was left from those thousands of years began to oxidize away, and there's some fascinating pictures of homes that are 8 feet above ground now because the ground surface has basically oxidized away. Same sort of thing is happening in Louisiana. The ground surface is receding. Talk about mycorrhizal fungi and how important they are in mediating soil systems, and so on. And leaf litter, this is saying that leaf litter contributes nutrients to our water bodies. But one of the fascinating, we've done a lot of studies throughout Florida for a variety of reasons. Dr. Harvey Harper is a stormwater guru, and his daughter, I guess it was high school, did a science fair project on leaching of nitrogen out of leaves when they are dropped into water. And basically what they found, she and her father, was that in about 3 days, all the nitrogen was leached out. So yes, leaves contribute some nutrients, but after about 3 days, what you have is carbon. And we want to denitrify. One of the things that happens with nitrogen is we can put it back in the atmosphere. Our atmosphere is predominantly nitrogen gas, N2 gas, and we can take pollutants like nitrate or ammonia that we put on our lawns, and we can cause denitrification. And to do that, we need two things. We need carbon, like those leaves there, and swamps tend to cause denitrification. So a project that we built up in Tampa took a mineral that grabbed the nitrogen as it was going by because it was ionic, and so different charges allowed us to grab that nitrogen and hold it long enough for the microorganisms, all of these microorganisms in the soil that are so important, to nitrify it, change the form. Now it was nitrified, and then we put it through a small swamp, and it became nitrogen gas and was innocuous as far as we were concerned. Go ahead, Cody. And this is from that same publication, and they're showing that canopy over turf grass could reduce the relative loading rates by almost 25%, 23.8%, and over impervious surface, less so, because all the water is not going to get to the root systems, it runs off. But tree cover is actually helping us, and we're going to talk about some of the modeling we've done at the celery fields to look at how much we are intercepting rainfall and how much we are reducing runoff. Good. Okay, we're going to try a little video, and this is when, about a year ago, we planted the celery fields. It's a 2-minute video, yeah. And then if you go to full screen over there, yeah.
Volunteers from Florida Veterans for Common Sense in cooperation with the Rotary Club in Sarasota Bay.
I don't know if we can.
Red Tie started.
Yeah.
And Sarasota County's Neighborhood Environmental Stewardship Team, NEST, all worked together to plant a demonstration microforest at the celery fields in Sarasota County. Japanese botanist Akira Miyawaki pioneered the technique to grow a microforest in 20 or 30 years that can have the attributes of a forest that is 200 or 300 years old. Using Miyawaki's technique, native species are planted close together to compete for sunlight, so they grow upward instead of sideways. As a result, the forest grows denser and as much as 10 times faster. As a bonus, in 3 short years, the microforest should be nearly maintenance-free. The team worked with the Native Plant Society in Audubon to find the best mix of native plants for the approximately 1/3 acre chosen for the site. The team planted more than 15 tree varieties, including some that will become immense, like bald cypress and live oak. Native shrubs and plants were planted as understory. The site chosen for the forest was an open field covered with grass. In order to suppress the grass and provide nutrients for the forest's vast growth, volunteers covered the site with a layer of cardboard and covered that with wood chips. The primary goal for the forest is to sequester carbon to combat climate change, as the microforest will be an effective carbon sink. Forest ecologists estimate that natural forests can store 40 times more carbon than a monoculture forest, and our team estimates that the celery fields microforest will sequester over 1 million pounds of carbon in 30 years.
Okay, we can find our way back to the presentation. So, the soil, again, the site we selected there is near the large hill at the celery fields, and I don't know if any of you have been to the celery fields, but there's a large hill there. And what we did, we bought the property. It had been used for celery growing. Again, it used to be a sawgrass marsh. They drained it, grew celery, and when the county bought it, we dredged out the ponds that are there now. And what came out of it was a lot of clay. And the clay was very high in arsenic. Arsenic is used as a pesticide. And we couldn't get rid of the clay. We tried to give it away. Not even the landfill would take it because they were worried that it would violate their environmental permits. So we piled it up really high there and made a recreational amenity out of the hill. But what we found when we went to plant the forest, I took a post hole digger and tried to drive it into the soil. And again, I'm an old guy now, I'm not real strong, but I got about 2 inches down because when clay dries out, it hardens really hard. And so we ultimately hired a landscape company with a big auger to auger through the clay, and when we got beneath it, we found nice sandy soil. And I don't think I did not have pictures of it, but Dr. Brad Overly is a professor at New College, and he brought his students out recently and sampled our soil. And so among the things that I am really interested in is getting some hard scientific data. You heard what is the common story about microforests. They grow 40 times faster and so on. What does that really mean? What about the soil? What's happening in the soil? And as I've looked for any scientific reports and or quantification of any of this, so far I haven't found much. So I'll talk a little bit about our measurements and what we're trying to do, and we're going to work with Dr. Oberle, who's going to come back every year, we hope, and monitor our soil. At New College, they planted what they called a food forest. It was a lot of trees that grow fruits and nuts and so on. And Brad found that it was sequestering carbon much faster than what he had actually anticipated. They used much the same technique. They put cardboard down, a mulch material on top of that, and then planted it. So gathering some information to better understand and to shape how we do things in the future could be a real valuable part of what we accomplish with the microforest. This is a program produced by the U.S. Forest Service called iTree, and this is an iTree calculator. And this is some of the inputs into it. Talks about greenhouse, the things that you can produce out of it. Greenhouse gas is sequestered, the energy conserved, air pollutants captured, stormwater filtered or reduced, and so on. You want to go to the next one, please? And you go through this. It's really a simple program. It's an online calculator. Anybody can Google iTree calculator and get this. It asks for, you start out with simple stuff, the state, the city, and so on. Go ahead. And here I've put it in Florida, Sarasota County. Fruitville is the city that shows up for the celery fields area. And next, you get some things about emissions. Part of what the model asks is, are you planting this tree near your house or a building? If so, it will shade it, and that will reduce your heat load and therefore your energy use and so on. But, and that's what the electricity emission factors are for and so on. But at the bottom it asks for years for the project, and in this case I put 40 years, and it asks what your expected mortality rate is. How many of the trees do you think will die? And I put 10% there. And then you get this, and it's the primary thing that's going to go in here is the species. And once you've put in the location, which I had already done, you get the next screen. And to the right, it asks a distance to the nearest in feet, and that's distance from a building and so on, if you're interested in that. Our forest was far from the bathrooms there at Celery Fields, that's the nearest thing, but so we didn't really care about the energy conservation parts of our forest. But we've put in the location, and then you get the next screen, which is a pull-down menu of species of trees. And in most instances, I found the native trees that we wanted to plant. There were a couple, and I don't remember what they were, that did not occur in that list, so I had to choose one that I thought this will be most like what we have planted. So, and one of the inputs is the DBH, the diameter at breast height. That's typically how you measure the diameter, the bore of the tree. And so we put that information in for each tree. How big is the DBH, the diameter at breast height, and so on. And go ahead to the next one, and then we get an output that looks like this, and it does all kinds of things. It tells you how much money you're going to save by shading your building, but what we were really interested in was that CO2 sequestered column here. And this is the species. I've got maples, ball cypress, magnolia, hickory, oak, etc. And it tells me how much over the whatever period of time I used the 10-year lifespan. It tells me how much each of those groups of trees, there was 6 of each of them, and how much they're going to sequester. And then I totaled it and get the next screen, which is a graph. That looks like this, 10-year graph. And that's useful when I asked the expert help at iTree, what does your model output include? Does it include the above ground portion and the below ground portion, or just one of those two? And they said it includes everything. So now I had to separate those. Go ahead. And again, very hard. I was challenged in finding scientific data to put in. The U.S. Forest Service looked across the country and looked at forests and figured out how much an average forest had in terms of above ground biomass, organic soil carbon, that's the organic portion of our soil, how much was accounted for by the litter, by the below ground biomass, that's the roots of the trees, and a little bit by dead wood. So I was able to use that and put it into a model and come up with this. And so to make it a more interesting looking graphic, the green part is the above ground portion of the carbon that's sequestered, and you'll notice that the brown portion, which is showing roots and whatnot below ground, is larger than the above ground portion. About 60% of the total carbon stored in a forest is actually below ground, we think about forests as what we see above ground, but there's more happening. When you look at the total number of organisms, microorganisms below ground, we're in the millions. And when we look at the amount of carbon sequestered, when we look below ground, there's actually more sequestered below ground. The trees are putting out exudates, sugars that the microorganisms are using to grow, and then they are, if things like mycorrhizae that are in the roots of the trees, they are making nutrients and minerals available to the tree. And the next graph shows what we found as we looked at what amount of runoff will be reduced by that forest. And so it's gallons of runoff avoided. And you may know that the way we pollute our water bodies is by our runoff predominantly. Also, we infiltrate some of it, but the predominant method is, we build gutters and concrete, and that runs the water off. We've spent 100 years or more in Florida trying to channelize and dry up our swamps and whatnot. So many of our systems are really good at causing runoff. We get it off the land really quickly. Well, as it runs off really quickly, it picks up all the nutrients, the fertilizer, and the pet waste, and the atmospheric deposition. Remember that nitrous oxide that we're getting from burning fossil fuels and our automobiles and whatnot, and it's ending up in the runoff, a lot of it. Moat Marine Laboratory worked with a number of local governments years ago, and we actually did we used atmospheric deposition samplers, which are like buckets that sit there, and they have mechanical roofs that are automated. So you get one that's collecting dry fall when it's not raining. That bucket is open. When it starts to rain, the lid moves over and closes the dry fall bucket and opens the wet fall bucket, and so on. And we simultaneously measured runoff. So we got some pretty darn good numbers on what amount of pollution was coming out of the air. And at that time in Tampa, it was about 57% of the total nitrogen loading to Tampa Bay was coming from atmospheric deposition. And it's changed. We've done better jobs of stack controls on coal-fired power plants and all kinds of things. Let's go ahead. All right, and this is just my scribbling. We went out and put a unique number tag on every one of our trees. So here we're going to 258, just to give you some idea. There's some blanks in there. As we were trying to tag these trees, we ended up with some blanks. Like that was the raw data, and then the next one, my grandson is a math and statistics major, just about to graduate from USF Tampa, and he had to have some data for one of his statistics classes. He put it all into Excel for me, and so I can sort it now really easily and so on, and put it into the model. But so each of those trees has a metal tag on it with that number. And so what we have done, the county forester with Division of Forestry, Florida Division of Forestry, Richard Larson came out and helped Mike Burns, you'll see Mike in a second in another of our videos, measure the DBH of every tree there and the height. And so we put that into basically this Excel spreadsheet. So we hopefully will come back next year about the same time and see how much those trees have grown. That above ground biomass, how much it's changed. Okay. That's really poor quality. this says Celery Fields Microforest Tree Trail Tour. Dr. Marguerite Beckford is an extension agent at the Sarasota County Extension Office, and she has a program called Treejuvenation. And so her focus is trees. And Marguerite asked if we would do a tour through our Celery Fields Forest for Arbor Day. There's 2 Arbor Days, and one is national and one is state or something or other. But at any rate, we did a tour, and she took our data from that spreadsheet you saw and put it all into this system. And you see a QR code up there. If you scan that QR code, it will take you to the Treejuvenation site, and you can scroll down, and it'll give you the answers. What this is saying, red maple, lifetime carbon dioxide sequestered at maturity. If you want to know how much a red maple will sequester at maturity, you go to the Treejuvenation site and scroll down and look at red maples for the next one. And then we have an answer sheet that we were trying to get people to go and look at the site and get the numbers themselves. But again, all of these little numbers that you can't read there, those are the individual tags on maple trees. So that's all the numbers of trees that are maples. These are all the tags and the numbers of the trees that are red cedars and so on. And the numbers here represent the total at maturity, how much carbon is sequestered or how much runoff. This one is gallons of runoff intercepted. When we have small rainfall events, water stays on the leaves and never hits the ground. And New College actually did a little study where they quantified that. And again, a lot of these things, there's not really great data, but and then the last one is gallons of stormwater runoff avoided. So, and the runoff is avoided by 2 mechanisms. One is the tree is intercepting rainfall. Some of it doesn't reach the ground. The other thing is that tree is sucking up water out of the ground and transpiring it through its leaves out. And so that water will not become runoff. All right, so we are now at about 1 year since we planted the forest. And my preference, Cody, is to look at this, but if you could fast forward, I get on there and I go on, and I'm boring them enough already. If you can fast forward through my part and focus on Mike and Jeff, 2 of our other members.
Well,
Go back to the start. Yeah.
But what I'm trying to tell you is...
I'll go to the start. There you go. Can you go to full screen on that?
Morning, Colonel.
Hi, Jeff.
There's my guy.
Jeff Farmers. I'm a member of the Florida Veterans for Common Sense, and I'm here at the garden. Here is our surf project out by the Silver Field. I am a volunteer, and we need volunteers, by the way, so the reason I'm mentioning this to you is we have a project out here that requires constant maintenance. We have a microforest, which you'll hear from the other guys about that. I know nothing about microforests. What I do here is mow the lawn. I'm at the lowest end of the food chain. But what I'm trying to tell you is, and I like to emphasize it, is this is going to be for you, the members of Sarasota County, and your grandchildren, and even your great-grandchildren. We have started out here with what they call a microforest. And as you can look around, we need more trees. Now we're all environmentally conscious, so let's get together on this. We need help. So why don't you all just get together? Here's my number. You can go to the link to find it. We'd love to have you out there. So thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you out there.
We're gonna try and do a field trip for you all if anybody is interested.
Sure.
And introduce yourself and tell us what you have to do with the forest.
My name is Mike Burns, and I am the Vice President of the Florida Veterans for Common Sense. And we have, along with help from some NGOs, Rotary Club, a couple other people, built a forest. And our whole idea was to, this is our, I guess I call it our spitwad against climate change. It's small beginnings, but solid, beautiful, and we hope to make this a kind of a pattern for this county to follow. The Defense Department has come out and said that climate change is a national security issue, and as a veterans group, we took it seriously. We're into a lot of different things, but this is kind of one of our top projects. We got help from McKeechin. Oh, I see, wandering up the trail is one of our chief scientists and advisors, Jack Merritt. Jack, don't go anywhere.
Now you can fast forward.
Can you tell us what you,
I don't think I said anything particularly unique there. Yeah, there you go, harmful. No,
the project, we hope to get support from the county to expand this project, perhaps around the hill or other county property. And we've received such great support. I have to mention McKeithen Nursery. Eddie McKeithen up in near Mayaca, a little north of here, about 40 minutes away, has donated many of the trees, some of the big oak trees. So we have about what, 15, 16 different species of forest.
Yeah.
From slash pine, loblolly, pignut hickory, oak, various species of oak. Take a look around. Please come and take a look around and walk through this. You'll feel the same magic that we do. Look at it now. It's a park. And we can do this anywhere if we get the land and the opportunity.
And you might mention, Mike, that we put a unique numbered tag on each tree, and as you walk through the forest, you can look at those tags. And our county forester from the Mayaca district helped us to measure the diameter and height of each of these trees, which we've put into a database. And we also are working with the county extension service, right? That I think on Arbor Day, we'll be having walks through the forest where people can learn about each of these trees, and maybe they'll want to go home and plant one.
This is one of the best experiments, best projects I've ever been connected with. You walk through here, get on your phone, look at a tree, and you tell what it does, how big it gets, how much it releases oxygen, pulls carbon out of the air.
And look at the habitat that we're creating. The birds are already moved in.
3 nests already.
Yeah.
In fact, 2 eggs. I think we had 2 chicks, 2 little birds are flying around in someplace from a nest.
Red-winged blackbird.
Red-winged blackbird.
Yeah.
The idea now is to grow allow the trees to grow and help.
I think it can be a great teaching site for our community to come and walk through the forest, and I'm hoping that we can do periodic walks. Perhaps our county forester or our extension agent that deals with trees can schedule walks through the forest, and people can show up and walk through with them and learn more about the benefits of forest and urban forest, cooling our communities as we continue to get hotter. That's huge. When you walk under a large oak tree on a really hot day, you can feel the air movement that they create with bringing water through them, and it's 10 to 15 degrees cooler, and that can happen all over our cities.
the voice of truth and science speaking here.
So Mike was a POW just reminded me. Interesting folks that work with us. And I have a final slide. This comes from the Charlotte Harbor report, and it basically is saying, let's protect our native trees
Very kid Superman was our hero. One of the things that our sensors can do are to look into walls. What you see here is the wall of the
and I wanted to add in, they didn't talk about the soil, but again, I just encourage you to think about the below ground portion and how important that is. A great example of the soils, again, we hope that all of this is native soil. Two things. One is we have a development in Sarasota called River Forest, and Joe King was the architect developer. He left all of the native vegetation, trees, shrubs, except taking out enough for one road for the driveways, and he cut out enough of the vegetation to put a house in each of those. So we can do it without clearing the native vegetation. We then don't have to put in a lot of St. Augustine grass and so on. And he left the native soil. And so when I asked him if he had any water quality data on what comes out of his neighborhood, he said, no, but you can sample it if you want. And we put an automated sampler in, and over the 1 year that we sampled or tried to sample, there was never any runoff. So that vegetation and their low impact development techniques were infiltrating all of that. And what was my other point? Now it's escaped me. Okay, that's it. We had a few brochures about our project, the surf project over there, and some of our Piney Point bumper stickers if you're interested. Again, Piney Point put, and I forget how many thousand pounds, I think 80,000 pounds of actual nitrogen fertilizer went into the bay with 200 million gallons of effluent they pumped out. So it really, really fed that red tide well. And with that, if there were any questions, I'd be happy to take them. And if anyone is interested in a field trip, and we'd be happy to do a tour. We're right next to the Audubon Center, and we often do things in conjunction. Karen Willie, who is the manager now at the Audubon Center, is an active member of our Native Plant Society in Sarasota, and has been a huge help to us. And again, when I can't remember how to identify those trees, I have Karen come over and help me. She's been a big help. So, okay, that's it.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, you can shut down that. All right. So hopefully in the future we'll have more data on what we've accomplished, just at least in gross terms as we measure DBH and height change, and hopefully what's happening in the soil. Oh, that was the other thing I was going to mention. The Founders Club is a very exclusive development just east of the celery fields in Sarasota. And I was talking with the landscape manager one day, and he said, our trees keep falling over, and they cleared all the native vegetation, they dredged out ponds, stormwater ponds, and they put that material on the lots. And he said, what we found was that fill was clay, And we planted the trees in bowls of water because they're clay, it's holding water. The tree roots rotted and the trees fell over. So soil is real important. All right. Thank you, Cody. He did a great job of dealing with my challenged laptop.